I'm Jill Turner, and I'd like to welcome you to this panel discussion on creating the healing environment. And thank you for braving all the elements to get here. The discussion follows the exhibition on the body and the landscape and is part of London's Creativity and Wellbeing Week, organised by the London Arts in Health Forum. An inquiry report is to be launched on the 13th of June from the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Arts, Health and Wellbeing. This has become big parliamentary discussion, and so the movement is really taking off. A special thanks to Alice Montanini of the Open Gallery in Islington, who is standing there taking photos of me, damn her, and Joanna Wakefield in red, who is the Arts Director of St George's, for initiating, thinking, planning and supporting today's events, and to our panel members for giving their time today. Understandably, I didn't want to send Alice a photograph of myself or my CV. I'm sitting here, I assume, because they couldn't find anyone as old as me. And you're supposed to laugh at that point, please. Thank you. I have tried lots of new things all my life. I launched and edited the Times Health Supplement, a newspaper, at 29 without ever having worked on a newspaper. I commissioned a lot of articles from paintings in hospitals in their very early days, when there were, I think there were a one-person band. And I then went on to co-produce, never having worked in TV or film. I produced, wrote and part directed a complex multinational co-production with 5 TV channels in Lithuania via Moscow, Danish, Swedish, Barcelona TV before the Olympics there, and most difficult, BBC Wales. Called A Dream of Health and shown on Prime TV on BBC Two, it focused on the thinking of the honoured Director General of WHO, Dr. Halfdan Mahler. It was TV pick of the day in the Daily Mail, so somebody watched it. My motto is only connect. Saturday's attack on our community shows us the need to connect. A nurse, Kirsty Bowden, gave her life running to help others, as she had given her time many times before. Our colleagues have absorbed the shock and carried the burden of these outrages. Those injured in these attacks find themselves in hospital, mutilated, in pain and fear, among strangers and staring up at harsh lights, look at them, and blank walls, for they know not how long. The bereaved first face their grief in hospitals. Could we, throughout this meeting, think about what might relieve their suffering? I'd really like that to be an underlying theme. I'd now like to ask to introduce the panel members and to ask them to say a little bit about themselves. Jayne Lloyd is a research and evaluation associate in Brighton. She has done work on dementia and the effect of art on demented patients, as I understand it, fairly moderately demented patients in care homes. Jayne, would you like to say a little bit more about your work now?
Yeah, sure, I can do. So I'm a research and evaluation associate with Paintings in Hospitals, which it was interesting to hear used to be like a one-person thing and is now kind of really grown to a national charity. I'm there, I work with them equivalent of 1 day a week, and then I'm course leader of the Inclusive Arts Practice MA at Brighton University, which supports people who students who want to work with a range of groups, but more in a participatory arts setting. And then my work with dementia was part of my PhD, which I finished last November, and looked at the role of arts in care homes with residents who were living with dementia, and the aesthetics and materiality of that practice, as well as some of the ways that people with dementia interacted with art and artists in that space.
We'll ask you to comment on other things a little later. Thank you. Hilary is from the Open Gallery. He is a philosopher and has founded the Open Gallery. And perhaps, Hilary, you'd like to say a little bit more. We've seen the very soothing and very lovely work through that. But a little bit more about your position in this.
Thank you for that. As a philosopher, I'm probably best known for a thing called the theory of closure, which I might tell you a little bit more about in a moment or two. But as a headline, I argue that the world is open and we close it with our narratives and our experience. And I founded an organisation called the Institute of Art and Ideas, and we try and encourage both thought about philosophy and the promotion of art. And the work that some of you may have seen here by Open Gallery is related to that philosophy, but I'll leave it for that for the moment.
Dr. Anand Saggar is a clinical geneticist at St. George's. He's the past president, he tells me, of the RSM's medical genetics section. I don't know quite what you did wrong to be past president, but I expect time ran out or something. And he is, of course, you also run your own gallery, and so you're very much between the medical profession and the arts.
So
is that right?
That's right, that's right. So thank you for that introduction. So as it says in my name, I'm primarily a physician. I'm a specialist in clinical genetics. So I see a lot of interesting visual imagery in my job because that's the nature of the work that I do, particularly with children and particularly if they have genetic conditions. But my interest in art actually began when I was a medical student, and I've been collecting art for over 40 years, many emerging artists. And so when I became a consultant here, it seemed very natural for me to be working more with the artists that I knew, and I was involved in setting up a group called Hybrid, which was bringing together scientists and doctors and scientists so that bringing together artists together with scientists and doctors so they could come into the hospital and see some of the imagery. It was a time before Wellcome really got going in all of the wonderful imagery you see on the Euston Road, and it was all fascinating. And people wanted to see things, that famous image of the sperm being injected into the egg in the IVF picture. Well, those were new when I was bringing scientists in. And that organization worked together to produce images and was very much involved in a big exhibition called The Invisible Body, which was exhibited at Whiteley's in the early 90s. And I think the chairman of the trust one day went past my office and saw some painting on my wall and said, "Have that man come to my office." And I became chairman thereafter of the Hospital Arts Committee, which had been already established previously by other colleagues. And in fact, I remained chair for almost 14 years, and I stood down recently because, as you quite rightly point out, I decided to spend more time developing my own interest in art and also developing the art that we see in other individuals. And so I've had a long-standing interest in the value of art in the healing environment, and I'm looking forward today to the discussions that we'll have later. Thank you.
Somehow you managed to be a senior consultant while also running the director.
Well, the gallery was only in the last 3 years, and fortunately my sister manages it on a day-to-day basis, so my love is still in the medicine.
No, I wasn't suggesting you were shirking. But what I wanted to know was a little bit more about the GX Gallery.
So the GX Gallery is very much a modern contemporary gallery. based in South London, in Camberwell. It's in the top 10 of the South London galleries. And it's very much supporting emerging artists, and has a unique show every year called Flock, where we try to get the best of the UK graduates from the London region specifically together. But with my previous partner in the gallery, Davide Mengele, we set up another organization using the same art. We set up something called Float Art, where we took the best of the UK-wide graduates and we would give them a platform event on the South Bank to show their work. Some 60 artists, together with a prize to have a studio for a year. So the gallery is very much entrenched in trying to support art and emerging artists and bring affordable art to the people.
Thank you. Mike, Mike Neill comes to art from the Bonhams side of things, I was going to say. What by that I mean you've been running the tax and heritage department of Bonhams, and you have watched hospital art collections build up over the years. A little more?
Good evening. So I'm Mike Neill. I'm at the grubby end of the art world, I'm afraid. So I'm involved with the value of art.
He's shirking, you're grubby.
So a lot of what I do is valuing institutional collections. And how I got involved, particularly with this hospital, was that years and years ago, they were looking to streamline and have some idea of what exactly was here, because as you've worked out, that there are many, many miles of corridors, and no one really knew what was here. So about 12, 13 years ago, we undertook a asset appraisal of what was here and what might readily be exploited and shown to its best effect, and what other things might possibly be got rid of. And I'll talk more about how that's evolved a little later on. But I think for those of you who haven't seen the hospital from years ago, the new reception area in the Grosvenor wing exemplifies what we did. So we cleaned out a lot of what was there, and now there's that wonderful Edward Borden in the reception area that's beautifully restored and displayed, as well as a really interesting piece of sculpture. Sadly, it's so near to the entrance, not many people take it in, but it's an arresting piece if you see it on your way out. And so I've been a member of the Arts Committee, one of the few people who aren't actually resident in the hospital. So I hope I bring some sort of outside interest and influence on what the committee do. I'll pass on.
And Joanna Wakefield has recently joined St George's as arts director, having done a rather similar job in Perth in Western Australia. Joanna, a little more?
Yes, I've had 20 years experience working in hospitals with art, starting off at the Princess Margaret Hospital for Children in Perth. I was there for 10 years, and then another 10 years for one of the large teaching hospitals in Perth, where I managed a collection which was about similar size to the collection here. Basically, the hospital was about the same size, except there were more staff here. So I've had quite a lot of experience of working in a health environment with art, which does differ from the commercial world in quite a number of ways, which I'm sure you can appreciate. We have to be careful that we can't have too much sort of really controversial art, because this is, we obviously want to. It's for the enjoyment of the patients, the staff and their families, so we obviously don't want anything too dark, too black, or too macabre in its content. Basically, Art St George's, which I've been running. Well, I joined in August last year. It's sort of divided into a few parts. We've got an art collection of about 840 works, which is growing, and we've recently had a couple of wonderful donations. One, an installation piece by Chris Wood, which is a diachromatic sort of perspex glass in the Spiritual Care Centre. And we've also had a donation by Albert Irvin's family. So we have the art collection, and we have Carla, our curator, who works part-time, and that part of the... Carla's just there at the back in the blue. And that part of the Art St George's is sort of running exhibitions, a movement of art around the hospital, and generally improving the ambience of the hospital and sort of de-institutionalising the atmosphere for everyone that walks through the doors. We also run a live arts program, and I think Sarah is here somewhere, Sarah Weatherall, yes, who runs our live... Sarah's only here 2 days a week, and we wish it was for longer. But the live arts program is run for patients who are here long-term and who have chronic illnesses. And under that, we were fortunate enough last year to obtain a grant from the big lotteries, and we're running 3 programs. The Reaching Communities, which is a program for renal patients, Parkinson's Dance program, which is a program for patients with Parkinson's, and also a neuro rehab program for people that have suffered brain injury and mainly strokes. That's sort of it in a nutshell, but I can go on about that further. So, and I kind of oversee all that. Anyway, yeah, that's enough about me, and we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you. It occurs to me we don't know who we're talking to, and you probably know half of what was, or some of what, at least of what Joanna said, because you perhaps know her. Could I possibly ask how many staff members of St George's are here? Would you mind putting your hands up? Thank you. That's about 10. Are other people here because you've come in as members of the public, or from the arts side, or shall we try the arts side first? Okay, that's about the same. And members of the public, interested public? A few, thank you. Well, that helps, I think, to know who we're talking to. Can't remember who is who, but never mind. Okay, fine. So I just want to look at a little bit at the background of this. I go back to Florence Nightingale, who was aware that patients needed some brightness in their environment, and commented in 1859 that the variety of form and brilliancy of colour in the objects presented to patients have a physical effect and are actual means of recovery. One thinks, I think this is important these days, because so often gifts and cards get tidied away and put away, and so that the bedside table is clear for the water and the food. Certainly taking art books to my brother in hospital, I found they've been in a stack way far away from anything he can reach. But so Florence Nightingale noticed a beneficial effect. Perhaps one of the strongest findings is that research shows that a one-day reduction in the length of stay when patients are exposed to art simply because it makes them and their staff feel better. So that a one-day reduction in the length of stay of patients is quite an economic benefit. And amazingly, there's a study from the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, and some of you may know that really is a leader in this field, showed that labour, women giving birth, was on average 2.1 hours shorter when they gave birth in with decorative artwork around them. Myself, I find that hard to believe, because as I was climbing the walls of the corridor, I don't think I noticed the art along them, but you know, it has been suggested. Now, Jayne, I think you may be able to say a little bit more about the benefits of the researched benefits to patients, particularly dementia patients. Is that possible? Jayne did a PhD on this.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about my PhD. I'm actually coming to this as an artist, so I did a PhD from 2012 to 2016 at Royal Holloway in the Theatre and Drama department, and my background is as a fine artist. I make installations and sculptures. So I did an MA in fine art and then went on to do a PhD. I wanted to explore arts practice and sort of aesthetics and working with people. I also have 15 years experience of working in community arts and participatory art settings. So this kind of idea of kind of how to measure the benefits of arts and to quantify it and sort of just think about it in the terms of health and well-being benefits was quite alien to me when I came to my PhD, and also as an artist, whilst the arts and health sector has really grown, and that has many advantages to arts, and I have seen sort of positive benefits of art on people. I'm also not really coming at it from the kind of angle of measuring it, but it's often what I'm asked to do. So with my work with paintings in hospitals as well, we've been looking at how to evaluate it and what people get from the paintings and artworks on the wall, and it's really quite a complex process. It's slightly easier with participatory arts because you have a group of participants, patients, residents, care staff, whoever you're working with, that you work with over a longer period of time. With arts on walls in hospitals, one of the discussions I've been having at paintings in hospitals is how and what we can really know and what can be measured and what is quite difficult to be measured, and also around kind of the role of arts and what's different from a lot of the I think the perception of sometimes is that it needs to be bright and cheerful and positive, and actually why not just paint or decorate a room? So I think there's a need to capture nuances as well. I found both in my work at Paintings in Hospitals and during my PhD that sometimes when one of the things I was interested in, you talked about openness, and that art is open and it's symbolic and open to interpretation, and particularly when I was working with people with dementia, one of the things that we found was that we could talk about it or spend time on it as a focus for communication, because there's not a right or wrong way to interpret it in the same way as there might be in everyday life. So to give an example from my PhD, once we were looking at different fabrics, which is obviously quite different to an exhibition of artwork, but one of the people said it looks like curtains, so we could pick it up and we could hold it in front of a window, or we could shake it, we could move it around. Someone wore it as a shawl, and there's that openness. But if one of the participants had done that during their lunchtime and picked the tablecloth up, then that might have been seen as problematic behaviour or something more challenging. So there was something in art sessions and also when looking and talking about art that really kind of gave a focal point to conversations, to a shared space of being together, and and that openness and form of communication. I think that was one of the main things I found.
Do you think that in hospitals patients feel the need to conform to what is expected of them and never to go beyond those boundaries? I've always felt that I have to sort of jump back into bed when somebody comes into the room because I've done, I shouldn't be doing whatever I was doing, like looking out of the window or lifting the blind or something. I do think we become terribly institutionalized and fine. You're agreeing with me, which is nice. Would you like to say a bit? And also, Hilary, the book Closure was about this openness concept. I think now is the time for that, if you don't mind.
Okay, I'll sort of have a go. I just about this idea of closure, I want to argue that the world is open, but we inhabit a world of reality which is created by us, which is closed. So the closures that we make, which I think are linguistic, narrative, but they're also perceptual, enable us to do things. So closure is essential. We can't do without it. But I think it's the openness of the world that gives us richness and wonder and makes us feel alive. And maybe to elaborate a little bit on that, I think one way related to the work that we've been trying to develop in the context of an artificial or urban environment and a natural environment, I'd like you to think of the artificial environment, the urban environment, as in some way closed, and the natural environment as open. But what I mean by that, or to give you an idea of what I might mean by that, if you're if you're at a seashore watching a storm come in, everything in your perceptual field, certainly in your visual field, it is changing all the time. Obviously the light is changing, the specifics of any particular bit of your visual field, the way the wave is breaking, the sort of appearance that it has, but also, of course, the window in your face is changing. It's just not the same thing that it was a moment ago. It's somehow, it's not what it is. It's now something else. And indeed, we know perfectly well, you could walk down that same beach every day of your life, and it would never be the same. It would be different. It would always be different. And you can interrogate any bit of that visual field, however tiny, and find more variety, more change. Now, the artificial environment, and to make it properly artificial, you have to exclude the natural. So an interior space of a building is quite other than that. Nothing is changing. The light does not change. The walls do not change. The colors do not change. It's by comparison a profoundly arid environment. And of course, it enables us to do all sorts of things. It provides us with the safety of the space. It helps us to work. It can help us to meet other people and all of those sorts of things. So it has a purpose, but it is not open. And when I first tried to create the thing which has now become video painting, which there was some example of here next door, some of you may have seen it, I was trying to create something which was not closed, which was open. And that turns out to be rather more tricky than you might think, because while video, unlike many forms of art, is moving, we understand it with our meanings and our closures. So if you show somebody a video of anything, they will see it as having a meaning, like, oh, that's somebody walking across a road. Oh, that's a car chase. Oh, that's whatever it is. So they close what they see into a meaning. And indeed, we've all had thousands of hours of training in doing this, because that's the way we look at moving images. We look for narratives. And if we don't find a narrative, we are confused. In fact, we just force ourselves to find one. That's what we're looking for. And we don't really see anything else. So what I was initially trying to do was to present a moving image, but which avoided that closure and enabled you to engage in it and think, oh, what's going on there? Look at that. Look at that shadowing over here. Look at the way that this is happening up over there. The way that the image is changing, but not to see it as something. In exactly the same way that when you walk along that seashore, watching the storm come in, you're not looking for a narrative as such. You're just wandering along, you're chatting to somebody next to you. oh, look at the way that wind is blowing the tree. Look at the way the waves are falling. You're not trying to find a closure. You're just somehow engaging in what I would say, some sort of openness. And if you have any doubt of how important this openness is, I think you only have to think that if you were to find yourself in an artificial environment for any extended period of time, and there was no window, you would find that properly uncomfortable. Even a tiny little window would be better than none. And indeed, when we punish people and we put them in prison, one of the key things we do is to cut out the natural world. And that's taken to an extreme in a punishment cell where there are no windows. So that's the sort of thing that I mean by openness. And I think that it's very important to us as humans. If we don't have access to the openness of the world, we feel diminished and crushed by the aridity of the closure that surrounds us.
I have so many reactions to what you've just said, but I shouldn't hog it. Does anybody else want to say something before I butt in? Joanna?
Yeah, I'd like to just probably maybe challenge the, you mentioned about the closeness of a room, a room being closed. What about when people are in a room? Because I find, personally, I agree with the openness outside, but if you have a room with people in, but we're probably digressing a little bit here, if you have a room with people in, people change the atmosphere of that room. So I can't quite go along with a room being totally closed. Everyone knows if you walk in a room and two people have been arguing, they say you can slice the atmosphere with a knife, even though they're not even speaking. You just feel that. So there's that sort of, does that come into it at all as well? I mean,
Yes, indeed. So the people are in some, they are the change, but the actual architectural space is the bit that's closed. So I agree. As soon as you put something in it, then you have that change. You have that variety, but without it, you don't. And obviously, there are times when we don't want anything from the space. So I think a lot of artificial urban spaces are created precisely to get us to focus on each other and not to be distracted by somehow the openness of the world. But there are other situations where we really want that openness, and it makes us feel more alive.
So do you think by corollary that putting art into hospitals gives back that openness, and why there may be this connection between the healing and the earlier discharges and things?
Exactly. It seems to me that what's going on is that we want that openness. I mean, on a personal level, I had a relative of mine a couple of years ago who was very ill, and I went to visit her in hospital, and there was actually a large window there, but it just faced onto the back of another building, so which itself had no windows. It was just a brick wall, and she had a terminal condition, and said to me, "I just want to be outside." And in fact, we managed to get her home, and the first thing she wanted to do was sit by the window, and she spent most of the final weeks of her life looking out of the window. That's what she wanted to do. That's what made her feel better. And it seems to me that openness is somehow profoundly important to our experience. And I suspect that if we give people that in a hospital environment, they may well recover faster than they do without it.
I couldn't agree more. I have a brother who is terminally ill, and he lies there flat on his back, and he's a very fine artist. He was Slade commissioned to paint the portrait of the director of the BM. He's an extraordinary artist, and he's in a window, a room with no outlook, no window, and I've been trying to get a wheelchair to take him out, but then I've ruined my back, so I can't do that at the moment. And I just can't bear sunny days, because I just know that you know, he needs at least to be taken out onto the balcony, onto the, you know, into the woods, or, you know, I mean, it's just awful. Does anybody else?
We would really like to do a study with the work that is being generated through the Artists of Open Gallery, which is trying to do that, trying to provide a natural, open work that adds that the openness which often is missing in an artificial environment.
Could I ask the audience, because we're not really an audience, we want you to involve you. Does anybody else feel, have my reaction, that to put a human being in a windowless room, or in a room with a window staring straight at a blank wall, is a form of inhumanity and torture? And I've always thought this was the worst aspect of prison. And could we just have a show of hands? Does anybody agree strongly with that statement? Does anybody disagree with it? Could I ask you why? Because it would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I would just say I've talked to patients who don't have a window because they're, let's say, on a ward and they're in the middle bed, but they prefer to be on the ward because they have the company of other people, and when they've been put into a side room that might have a lovely window, they find they lose track of reality and time and ask to go back on the ward because they're missing the company.
Yes, I quite buy that. It shouldn't be an alternative. I know my junior hospital daughter said the new Southmead Hospital has lines and lines of single rooms off corridors, and she opens a door and says hello to somebody, and sometimes she's the first doctor who has seen them for 3 days, and you know, the nurses and doctors there seems to be no communication. Visiting somebody in a care home recently, I just appalled by how these poor old people were being dressed and cleaned, and their hair was all combed and their ties were tied and everything, and it was all done in total silence. And they were wheeled down and put into the lounge and parked next to somebody else, and there was daytime television blaring, and it was all done in total silence. There was no communication between the staff, the inmates, or whatever you call them, or between them. There was nothing, and yet it was all clean and well run, and 5 stars and everything. Sorry, go. Is there a question at the back? Sorry. The black, not the back.
Sorry, I was just going to reflect on something that was said earlier. A colleague of mine just looked up the details. There was an artist called David Roche who did a study called Open Windows, and there was with some patients, I think it was in Ireland, in a critical care unit where there were no windows at all in this unit, and the patients were in a unit for a very long time, and he went out and filmed footage in a meadow and I think in an African plain, and unedited, this footage was just played on a video screen. There were no windows in this unit, and it wasn't possible to put any windows in, but they actually had video screens up so the patients could actually see the outside world of some description. It was unedited footage, and they were just able to have a view of the world happening, and something, there may have been nothing happening for 3 hours, and then the wind blew something, or an animal appeared and disappeared. And the recovery times were shown to be better.
Which is not so dissimilar from the video
yeah,
there.
Yeah.
And I was saying, I woke up, just looked out the window, and I was lucky enough actually to see the wind in a willow tree and the wind in a silver birch tree. And I know that's privileged, but that constant change, not unlike the sea, is just extraordinarily soothing and life-giving, really. So.
don't know David Roach's work. It sounds very interesting. It certainly has lots of parallels with what we're trying to do. I think the issue then is that when you shoot the material, how you shoot it, so it is not it's not immediately closed by the viewer, so that one of the phrases you had is, oh, nothing happens for say 3 minutes, and then something happens. Well, of course, something is happening all the time, and it only appears not to happen because you just think, oh, it's a tree. But if you shoot it in such a way that it doesn't somehow look like a tree normally does, and it's more abstract, and you are engaged with the patterning and the sort of patina, as it were, of the image, then I think you get closer to it being constantly alive, or at least that's the challenge, I think, of the medium.
I'm very pleased that this discussion has got so quickly onto video and watching change and movement, because and also windows, because I can't live without plants and plant life and so on, and so I found myself in one of the earlier discussions saying, you know, could we have sort of ivy growing up the windows, so, or some twig flapping at the window, or you know, could we design hospitals with some kind of encroachment on the window so that somebody could see some plant life outside the window, because this banning of plants and flowers is from hospital wards is to me so terrible. Joanna,
sorry.
would you like to talk about?
Yeah, so I think this is what we're going along the lines of obviously is the aesthetics. You know, whether it's plants, whether it's videos, whether it's window images, and of course we look at art in hospitals because that's probably as far as we can go. I mean, videos would be nice, and there are plants in some areas, but so the idea of having art on the walls is to reduce stress, and if you take a person that is being told bad news, or you know, like we mentioned earlier about the people in the situation that have come into the trauma centre, and you know, they have people that are dying in front of them, really traumatic situations. And I can speak from personal experience with this. If you are told bad news, what happens mentally is that your brain starts searching for something that you're going off the planet into panic mode, unreality. You can't believe this has happened. And what happens with your brain? It searches for something to ground you, and the grounding can usually come from something like a painting. It's amazing how the brain works. I know I say this because I speak from personal experience, but I've also known other people to happen with other people. When you've been told bad news or something happens, you are looking. Your brain is searching for grounding, and grounding can come, and not in the form of, like, you know, you don't want to see a nurse's station or an IV tube or anything like that. You're looking for something pleasant. This is what the brain does. And so if you have art, whether it be video, whether it even be a window, if you have something that is pleasing to the eye, and this is why we have to have images in hospital that aren't necessarily controversial, but we would like to have some controversial paintings when we do have some, but usually people are looking for something that they can relate to and ground themselves. So I think this is the importance of art in hospital. At the same time, having said that, we don't really want to fill the hospital full of chocolate box type scenery paintings. You know, I do like to look at the intellectual side of art, and you know, something that can maybe challenge, but at the same time is soothing to the patient.
Is one of the advantages of video that it might be possible for the patient to control it, in the sense of turning it off once they've had enough of it? I mean, to lie looking at the same painting for a long time, endlessly, always the same painting, might actually be counterproductive, might become rather annoying. And what
Yeah.
one of the attractive things, it seems to me, about having a video is that it might be possible for the patient to have some control of it. It did occur to me actually that maybe they should each have their sort of screen and video player, and they might be able to bring in home videos of their grandchildren or their pets or whatever, but maybe I'm being outrageous. I just trying to put myself in the patient's position.
No, I totally agree. And one of the things that would be nice, I think, with, there's so much TV around, but I think it would be nice to have maybe TVs with images of art in the hospitals that you can flick and go by. And one of the hospitals in Perth that one of my colleagues worked at, actually, it was a private hospital, so lots more money. That's what they did. They got the hospital collection on video, and so that it could just rotate, and so that people were always looking at lovely images. Yeah, it was lovely. So I totally agree with that, and I think there's far too much, kind of rubbishy TV that is in the waiting rooms and the corridors. I go along with that.
Mike?
I was just going to mention that it's noticeable that a lot of hospital collections have, going back to what Hilary was saying, was this idea of a landscape, a very abstracted landscape. So in a way you can make your own images from it. And I think the St Ives School was one that really lends itself to this. And if you look at various collections around, particularly around London, a lot of them have Albert Irvins and Peter Lanyon's, Paul Filer's, sadly not original work, but mostly graphic work. And that really lends itself in that it's very abstracted landscapes, sometimes figurative, but you can make endless patterns and shapes. I even noticed there are a couple around the walls here, perhaps not in the St Ives idea, but the same idea that it's blocks of colour that vaguely form shapes, and I think that's a useful way of getting people to engage.
I was trying to think what makes a painting endlessly interesting and beautiful, what makes a good painting, what are the best painting, the paintings we all want. And they are paintings that are not only just straightforwardly beautiful, but they are changingly beautiful and endlessly interesting, and quite often have detail in them, which is very beautiful as well. Sorry, I'm rambling. You were wanting to ask a question. We've passed, are we? It's gone. Anand?
Do you want to make the comment? Yeah, I was just going to say, the sort of idea of a closed room with no windows being almost a form of medieval, because that was actually a punishment back in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, where they would have a section which was completely windowless, and it was in constant darkness all the time. It's just sort of shoved. So,
I mean, on this idea of narrative is quite interesting, because in fairness there's always probably been art in hospitals. It's just that it used to be of the governor of the board or something like this, or somebody sat behind a desk, and I think we have a few of those here as well. But the narrative changed, because before it used to be like Hogarth's Pool of Bethesda, which is at in Bart's in the Great Hall. It was the narrative about what would happen to you with your illness. The death by TB, or the depravity of poverty and the illnesses that would beset you. But we don't do that anymore. We don't tell you what's going to happen to you. The art has changed to becoming abstract or a scene. And I think that's part of the change that's, I think, been very important, and the recognition. But as you said before, even a simple colour change on the end wall can make a big difference to break up that monotony. And just as you might say, create the little, something's changed. Simple things, it doesn't have to be expensive.
And as you, sorry, Jane.
I think I was saying that, though, to also, whilst I think decorating and thinking about interior design and colour is really important, I was also kind of asking what art does and what's specific about art that's just decorating doesn't do, because I think there is something more than that. And whilst I think things that are soothing and sometimes things that are very pleasant and artwork are really important, I've also found through my work that sometimes the art that people don't immediately like or wouldn't choose is actually the artwork that provokes the most discussion. And I think you were talking about kind of whether patients in hospitals kind of obeyed kind of what the and I found, and what we found in care homes was that there was kind of a sort of expectation of what people do. And one of the things that they got from the art sessions, I think sometimes from painting hospitals as well, from choosing artwork in their home, is a chance to dislike something and to say, and to be a bit kind of, do something that kind of does mildly rebel against that, which is also really, really important thing. And maybe sometimes if you are very depressed or upset or something very tragic, maybe you don't want this kind of overly pleasant thing. Maybe sometimes people do, but I did some research with painting hospitals into a project that they call Works Like People Too, which commissioned some works by a contemporary artist called Tom Ellis to go in GPs' waiting rooms, and they kind of did all of the things that people didn't want in some ways. I mean, they weren't sort of distressing or anything, but they were confusing to people. People didn't know what to make of them. Sometimes they were bigger than what they maybe should have been, but they provoked a lot of discussion. And someone who was involved in the project, her partner was a surgeon, and one of the quotes that really stuck with me from that was that he'd come out of a terrible day in she said he'd come out of a terrible day in surgery, and all the artwork was what he described as sort of plastic positivity, and he said this did nothing for me. So whilst I think there's a place for things to be really pleasant and we don't want to distress people, there's also something around thinking about the diversity maybe of art and the nuance and the specificity of art rather than just interior design as well.
And I just want to mention portraits. I mean, a friend of mine had a pub in which every picture is a different portrait. It's absolutely populated with pictures of people. And obviously these are all sorts of characters. And you were mentioning pictures of governors. I quite like those massive pictures of all these people. You know, I mean, you can hardly see them, but sort of ranks and ranks of all of Westminster School or God knows what, you know. But actually to kind of have a magnifying glass and look at all those and all these people, you know, and at least your brain can start thinking about them, and you know, well, he looks shy and he looks a bully, and you know, I mean, at least you're relating to people. I mean, why we have to have either company for patients and human interaction or art, I don't know, but I do think that sometimes portraits are quite useful to have around.
I think art is somewhat subliminal in a way, in the sense that in my experience of working in hospitals, you often get the art's on the wall, and you sometimes get comments, you sometimes don't get comments. But when you take the art away, that's when you get the feedback. Oh, where's that piece of art gone? So I find that an interesting sort of sphere of that it's there. People probably take it for granted. They do look at it. There's a silence about it, but take it away, and everyone will jump up and down.
And I'm very keen on mobiles. I mean, because they're constantly changing, and because you can change them a bit more if you blow at them and things like that. Would you like to talk about that?
Well, I think one of the things that's, just going back to the thought I initially posed of the openness being a desirable thing, and just remembering that the prison cell takes that away. That's what it takes away. And just how important that is to us. I think then the puzzle is how do you introduce that openness? What is the way of doing it? And how do you create work which is open? And I think the sense in which you were saying, you know, we don't want blandly happy images. I think the reason we don't want blandly happy images is because we just look at it as, well, there's a dog looking pretty. You know, it's got no life to it. There's no. It's sort of closed.
And there's an element of jealousy.
And so to get the open, how are you open? So we've puzzled with that with video. A lot of video is the opposite of open because of the narrative that it has in it. You just watch the narrative, and if it repeats, it's grim because you get this sort of endlessly repeating narrative, and maybe you don't want this narrative. You don't, that's not the relationship you want with it. So to try and overcome that, we developed a form of technology which is called La Luna, which plays out the video paintings in such a way that they flow but they never repeat. So and the scale is substantial. So the video paintings are organised into series, sort of 5-hour series. So but they don't, as I said, they don't repeat in an order. So you don't get a sense of a narrative form, and you're waiting for the next one. And instead that it's somehow closer to actually being in a natural space. But I think that is a puzzle. How do we know openness is what we need? You know, we know that the punishment cell doesn't have it. So there's a puzzle. How do we get it in there? And how do we get it in a way which is genuinely open and isn't some plastic caricature of openness?
Could you just tell us about this book, Closure? Did you write it, or?
Yeah, yes. It's a.
It sounds very interesting.
Can
we have the reference or the publisher or the date or anything?
Sure, it's published by Routledge. It's called Closure. It's a philosophical theory. It's not entirely easily accessed, but hopefully it's understandable.
Thank you. Anand? You want to say something?
No, I think it's a very interesting idea. I can totally get the concept about the narrative. We search for narrative. I mean, in the gallery, we always talk about, oh, this painting's got a wonderful narrative. But the idea is always to let them tell you what they see in the painting. So the art of the sale, I'm sure, will be no different in the auction world, is for them to see what they want to see, and people will see form and movement and fluidity in a work or a sculpture. And I think your point about the portraits is the thing that always makes me smile and makes me happy, is that there's art for everyone, and what one man's floor is another person's ceiling, and these various idiomatic expressions, and that's what makes it all so wonderful, and it's why we mustn't be too dogmatic about what we have or don't have, and recognize that the art has to be accessible. And that's always one of the great challenges in a hospital setting, because it's not locked up. People theoretically could just walk off with some of the artwork if they were able to put it under their arm and go away. And I think we all saw a video of someone taking something from the Chelsea Westminster Hospital once to put a sculpture, put it straight in his bag and walk straight out. And that's one of the great challenges with an open art gallery. So, yes.
Yeah, the image about the window, I was just thinking if it's not about the patient, the fact that the patient connects with the outer world and actually could be seen from the outer world. Not just actually looking out, but actually kind of getting the knowledge that I'm still visible to the outer world, even though I'm inside. And also you were talking about images or pictures or films that kind of doesn't really depict anything in terms of narrative, so that kind of be a soothing thing. But don't you need to have kind of both sides there as well, that you always might want to reflect yourself in an image, kind of to reassure yourself that you're still alive or you're still human, if you like. So it's not either or, but the kind of both. And as someone discussed earlier as well, that you can choose. That's really important, depending on where you are in your progress of healing, or that you're not just a number, a statistic, a number in the kind of hospital environment, but you're also still a human. But all that kind of entails of mirroring and, as I said, be seen from the outside still.
Well, of course, one of the great tragedies of last 50 years has been the separation of hospitals from the community, and the difficulties made, the barriers put on relatives in visiting, parking charges, the timings, the fact that you're not allowed to bring them this, that, and the other. Whatever you think, oh well, so and so would love this, and you get it ready for them, and then you're told they can't have it. These things make me very angry, plus all the privatisation, which has driven all the nice friends of the hospitals who came around with cups of tea and the newspapers and had a little chat with you. Joanna, would you talk about some of these restrictions? I don't know how you bear to live with them.
Well, we have to laugh. We've had a few headaches, even. Alice is laughing. Even just putting this talk on. Only the reason I say this is basically it is a very large institution, and with large institutions, there's 8,000 staff that work here, and there are many policies and procedures that we have to comply by. And that's okay, because obviously, we're a health institution and there are policies. I'm not so sure I like policies all the time, but we do have to comply by them, and we do the best we can. I think the difficulties is, for me, when I started, being new, it's knowing the correct channels and knowing the right people to go through. So it takes me longer than a lot of other people to get things done. So that's half of it. I'm sure if I've been in this job 10 years, I'm sure I'd find it a lot easier.
But one of the problems, as you explained to me, is that you can't actually have paintings in wards.
Not in what
they've got to be because they might collect dust. And so most of the art has to be in public areas. And so the public thinks, oh, this is a nice hospital, it's got pictures everywhere. But when you're actually an inpatient, it's not like that at all.
It is possible to have them in the wards. It depends which one. What we call wet areas. We can't have art in what we call wet areas, but and we do have to. It has to be bypassed through infection control. But it's not impossible. But it's a little bit difficult. So we try and have the. When we do have art in some of the wards, but we just have it sort of outside. To be honest, there's not a lot of room on the walls of wards because of all the technical equipment that, things hanging down, things that you push and say ping and whatever. So it is a little bit difficult to get them directly on the wards in front of people. That's why I came across with the suggestion of maybe lots of people seem to like TV, so have the paintings on the video screens because people can have TVs. But we try and put it wherever we can. I think the bottom line is we do the best we can being under National Health, although the Arts Live team are funded by the charity. And I have to make that very clear. So, otherwise people, the next thing is they say, oh, the NHS is going down the drain. How come you're spending money on art? But, it's very important. But I think, within our realms, within the realms of this hospital, I think we do the best we can for the situation. There are certainly policies and regulations that are trying. But, I do have to toe the line.
Could we use the ceilings, please?
For art?
Yes. And do something about these lights that make it impossible to... people, you're lying flat and you're staring at these bright lights which are often turned very full. First thing I do when I'm visiting a hospital is turn some of them off, and
Yeah.
they soon come back on. But I mean, there might another brother said, "Oh God, that's a relief." When poor man staring up at, I mean, just could I invite people to stare at one of these lights for a minute, and just imagine that you can't move, and you either I mean, it is. And these are not very bright lights. These are quite sort of sculpted lights. But if you have a rank of 5 fluorescent lights staring down at you in a ward, it is pure hell.
Mm.
So, I mean, can we project? Can we soften the lights? Can we?
There's been some innovative work, hasn't there, in the children's ward where they've used the sky, the starry sky type of appearance. And there's been some other work.
Go on. Sorry, I've got the microphone.
And there's been some other work as well, putting images on the walls in theatres or when you're going under the anaesthetic, and even in some scanners and things where you can focus. So, but all these things have their challenges, because in the end it's a health establishment. We have to look after health and safety. We have to make sure we don't give people infection from the things that we put in, and it is a challenge, and I share your frustrations, as do many others, but in the end, it's a functional environment with a purpose, and that functional element can't be too much affected. But that brings on, I think, to a different issue, which is about design and art. And it isn't just necessarily about putting something on the wall. The Maggie Centres were famous. If those who don't know them, they were involved in looking after women, particularly who'd had breast cancer or other patients with cancer, and they designed open spaces with gardens and views, as you quite rightly say, and they gave people somewhere to breathe, and they created a greater sense of harmony and well-being in those individuals, and that's been taken up by others. Indeed, as you mentioned in our front entrance, which has been amazingly improved. If for those of you who've been here long enough to know in fact, I can't even remember what it looked like. It was dreadful, wasn't it? It was miserable.
The effect on patient health was measurable, was it not?
Yes, people felt they were coming to a hospital that was going to make them better.
People perhaps discharged somewhat earlier. I mean, it may not be very, per patient, be very large, but overall it made an environment which was more powerful.
Absolutely, but I think the trouble is we don't measure it enough, though, do we?
No, we don't.
Can I just follow on that? We're talking about measurement. As probably a lot of you know, there are many research articles about arts in health, and we do know we have evidence base that it is beneficial. The argument is that a lot of it is anecdotal and not so much analytical. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, full of technology and pen pushing, we really need to, in order to get funding for arts in places like hospitals, we have to really direct our research to be more statistical and analytical. And at the moment, it seems that it's more anecdotal. You get the lovely feedback, but and there is proven research. But I think the funding in arts is really becoming political, and I think it's a case of proving to politicians that you can reduce bed days, you can reduce waiting times, you can also look at preventative arts to help improve people's lives so that they don't come into hospital so much, so we're not so overcrowded. There's all these things you can look at with arts. You can look at arts in society and how to reduce the health situations that we have. And I have a little statistic here. What was it? Something to do with cardio and people coming into hospital. If I can just find it to read. But it basically was sort of saying that if people that participate in arts-related activities, outside hospital will reduce the cardio admissions. You know, so in other words, like, it prevents the isolation. There's a lot of people in isolation, causes stress, and then stress brings on sort of cardio problems, cardio health problems, and they land up in hospital. So the arts really isn't just about hospitals, it's about community as well. You involve the people in the community in arts, and then you can help to reduce the art, you can help reduce the costs in healthcare. So this is like, I see it as this is the beginning, we're at the beginning of looking at arts and health. The research has been done. We know there's lots of research, but then you've got to get people to put the money into it. And the way to do that is to show them somehow, because politicians like number crunching, we need to put that research more into statistics. So changing the anecdotal into analytical, and persuading them to then also, you know, build hospitals that include more arts-related facilities. And I know in Ireland and in maybe Norway and Scandinavia and in Australia, there's a 1% for art. Like, in other words, whenever they build a new building, a new institution, doesn't have to be a hospital, university or whatever, but a new public building, they have to put 1% into art. And I know that they do this in some councils, but it's not not compulsory. So I think, yeah, the sort of the bottom line of it isn't it, we're always looking for money and funding, and this is the way forward I think we have to go, is to look into the way we are doing research and change maybe the models.
There's a lady who's been asking to question. Do we have a mic?
I was just interested in the design point of view regarding hospitals. Just to quickly, from my background, I've done a BA for public space, and I'm involved in photography, fine art photography. Water is my theme, which is very soothing and has its healing qualities. And with photography, you can be very creative in how you produce your work. So I was listening regarding the lights in the ceilings. There's also possibilities of producing the artwork as so-called Duratran that can work in the light. So you can wake up.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Possibility of
producing photography as a Duratran, which is basically instead of a paper, it's a film that can sit in an LED light box, like in a ceiling light. There is an LED light. You can have this photograph and receive it as an image instead of your light.
Of course, the lights do have to light the room, but
yes,
I mean,
I mean,
any change in the light, any relief from the light would be very good. I mean, we do know that white light is a very strong form of torture. I was wondering myself about lasers too. I mean, whether you could, these laser shows, whether you could have any kind of kaleidoscopic control of a laser light show on a, I mean, I've been thinking about it. I've been enjoying thinking about it. But that's very interesting. Thank you. But would that solution reduce the light?
No, you still have light. That's what I mean. But you have an image, and you have an abstract piece of artwork that is lit from behind, like a light box,
yes,
but in the ceiling.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just picking up on your thought. Can
yes,
you have artwork in the ceiling? Yeah. And other ways are also photography can be produced on aluminium, actually fused onto aluminium. So it's basically chemical proof, water resistant.
Can you shout a bit more? Just hold it a bit closer.
Is that better?
Oh, okay. Done much better.
So you can also produce photography on aluminium. So the color pigments are fused onto aluminium. So it's chemical proof, water resistant, fire resistant. So I guess it would fulfill all your health and safety criteria and would allow artwork to go into a theater or, wherever you wanted it. So it opens up all new horizons where people get, de-stressed a little bit, where we can help.
Nice ideas. Hilary, can you see that working? You're the person most likely to put this into action.
Well,
Have a mic.
Sorry, yes. I think as far as video is concerned, obviously a key issue is how you put it into a space. And it's obviously possible. Does that? Yes, something like that. As far as video is concerned, a key issue is how it's installed and where it's installed. You could obviously go on ceilings and so forth, and we have put it into lots of different environments. And there's no question, to come back to the sort of point you were raising before, there's no question that the environments where it is used in a public space, it has a radical effect on the emotional space of the people who are in that room or whatever it is. So,
but what about the bedridden patient? I want to help the bedridden patient.
Yes, no, indeed.
How do we do that?
Well, we can put it on the ceiling and so forth, but so the technology is there now to present video in. I mean, we try to avoid screens. I think there's something about screens which is not great, but it's something to do with the fact that light is not reflected. It's not it's not great. So we our installations as here, for those of you who've seen it, are always projections, and of course projections can be any size, and you can put them on a ceiling or on a pillar or on a wall. You can put them in any situation. The primary problem, I have to say, is usually a financial one. So the Open Gallery team could tell you more about it, but sorry?
Why does it need to be expensive? I mean, once you've got the model going, can't you replicate it?
Well, I think they have been installed in many locations. I mean, it is installed in the London hospital, but you will notice that is a London clinic, I should say. There's a private hospital. They have the money to do this sort of thing. We have spoken to many
and when you say
NHS hospitals, and the unit cost of getting it into, for example, every single bedroom and so forth, which I think would be very powerful in terms of the recovery times and so forth. We don't yet have enough data to prove that it will make that. I think I agree with you entirely. I think we must get the data, because all of our evidence is, in terms of seeing how people respond, that it would be dramatic, but we don't have strong enough data for hospital budgets to be able to say, okay, we are going to spend a reasonable amount on this, because it's not just the video, it's the wiring and all of the practical stuff that needs to happen to be able to do it, and at the same time, your point, make sure that it doesn't interfere with anything else that's going on. It's all doable, but it is a question of having the budget, and we need the data, the scientific evidence to back up the currently apocryphal story of what it's like. But I would be amazed if, when we do it, which we hope to do, that it won't be dramatic, in fact, in terms of recovery time and the benefits to the patients.
Could somebody please fund a research study talking to the people working at and the managers of the London clinic and the patients who have had this, and
we would like to do that. We are talking to people at the moment. It's surprising how long it takes to get these scientific studies off the ground and so forth. But that's exactly what I think needs to happen. And
what do you think is the cost per patient at the moment?
I think that's too difficult to say in terms of it's the dependence on what it is that they're being provided with, how it's being delivered, and so forth.
Is it installation cost or running costs?
I think it's not the running cost. The running cost is close to zero. It's the installation. It's the asset cost of the installation. And there is, of course, the video technology and the projection and so forth. That those aren't insignificant, but there are also, as I say, the structural costs of the changes you need to make to a building in order to be able to get those things in well and solve the key thing that you can't do anything which is going to in any way, in any situation, be a threat to your delivery of the healthcare.
Are we talking 5,000 per patient room?
Perhaps. I mean, it's certainly in that sort of ballpark.
Sorry, we've got to be...
Thank you. It sounds like we're talking about like 3 levels here, because you're talking about torture and you're talking about art, but it must be something in between before, you know. And I'm
We're
also
drawing connections.
Yeah, but I was also thinking about like when we're talking about policies, there's no kind of like policies that goes over all the councils and so on. But I mean, wouldn't it be a first step to have some kind of policies among the nurses to say like, if no one is actively being in treatment, we're not having it full light on, we're having the dimmer kind of midway or something, and as soon as something happens, we turn it on full. But unless we have it, I mean, it's just something simple that can be agreed upon on kind of local levels or bigger levels and so on.
It is one of the terrible things about being moved from a side room into a ward.
Yeah, but also like, obviously,
you don't
to
control the
aim
light.
for the artistic level of lighting, but there should be something in between that could be implemented already now, if that makes any sense. But also, actually, what's your view then on the political climate, like the election and everything? Are you hoping that a new government would give more funding? Would that be? Is there anything that you want to talk about at all?
I don't think, to be honest, I think it's just a question of starting it, and I don't think £5,000 per patient room is unraisable, you know, to do this, But I do think a study of the London clinic experiences would be helpful. But I mean, you're going to recoup in recovery costs and in general well-being the £5,000 so quickly. You know, you could even ask patients, look, you're going to be in here for 3 months. You know, would you like to pay £5,000 to have this and leave it behind when you've gone or something? You know, I mean, a few patients could actually afford that. You know, maybe you could graduate. I don't know. It needs thinking about, but it seems to me to be doable.
So on that point about the finances, look, we haven't got enough funding in the NHS as it is. Well, I wanted to make that point. So I think it's important to come back to the point that was made earlier. All of the art and the support for the arts in that sense is paid for by the charity, and various other hospitals. There's obviously 3 or 4 in London, including Bristol, which has a fantastic art collection. They're paid for by charitable funds. So the answer is, if they will give more money, things are possible. But at the minute, many of the charities fund the cost of essential equipment within the hospitals themselves. Now, I know that sounds political, but that's the truth of it. And so I think it's a cash-strapped system at the minute.
In that we are very fortunate in that we have invested in lights at our beds in all our clinical inpatient areas, which the patients actually control. So they can put the lights on full or they can dim the lights. So they have Guy's and St Thomas's. And an area of art that we haven't touched on is the benefits to the staff. We're very lucky at St Thomas's that we've built all our wards facing the river. So either they're facing the river and the Houses of Parliament, or they're facing the top of Westminster Bridge and our fountains and gardens at the front of the hospital. And the people who are supplying our TV services are actually running at a loss, because the patients don't want to watch TV, they want to watch the outside. As you said, they want to be engaged with their environment, so they're either watching the bridge, or people, or buses, or the water. And we get a lot of comments on the patient experience cards about how they actually didn't want to leave the ward because there's a fantastic view and it made them feel so much better. But for the staff, we have no windows because we're on the inside of the buildings, and you can feel very enclosed, especially in winter. You have no natural light. You get up in the dark, you go to your office, you have artificial light, you go home in the dark. And I'm from South Africa, and I get seasonal affective disorder. I hate it. Every year for those months I'm miserable. And one year I went away and I came back and my staff had invested in something they bought on the internet, which is a stick-on the wall. And I got a stick-on of a forest with a road going down it, and my colleague has a beach. And the two of us just go into these fantasies of being in these different locations that we really enjoy and love. And it de-stresses us. So I think we need to think of art for us as well. Because if we feel de-stressed, we're going to treat our patients better.
With that applause, we've hit, what is it, 8:30. Just anybody bursting to conclude?
I just wanted to say that these days everybody has a mobile phone, and could mobile phones be useful in providing or being a sort of a catalyst for art? I know that whenever I've had people in hospital, they've always wanted family photos to distract them from what they're going through. And in a way, it is a distraction that allows you, your body to get better while your mind is somewhere else. And I just wonder whether something like mobile phones would be useful in having, I don't know, a memory stick or family photos or personal art, your books, whatever.
Or laptops, presumably. Yes.
Or laptops, yeah, something bigger.
The last, I mean, one thing we haven't mentioned at all is, of course, art therapy and Matisse cutting out bits of coloured paper and people, you know, I mean, there's a quote that I heard about from somebody saying that how they were distracted doing art for a screen print, and an hour went by and they'd forgotten about that, the pain in the back of that hour. Any sort of participation in art is the most wonderful distraction from your own problems. Anything else?
Just
Sorry,
this is fine. I thought the comment, the description you gave of the hospital at the back and the view was, of course, exactly what we've been talking about, and chimes exactly with our experience. And of course, what I'd really like to say is if you have a look, if you haven't seen the imagery that is just next door, have a look at it on the way out and see whether you think, if you had that would to some extent provide you with the sense that you want. It's a separate issue of how we would then try and raise the money to be able to get something in for you like that. But I hope that it might provide a sort of solution that would work and make a real difference for you. As far as the smaller screen is concerned, I'm less. I'm a bit nervous about that. As I say, our experience is that screens are problematic in any case.
Use the phone as a conduit to providing sort of on the wall or in the wall, but not as a screen.
Yes, I agree. So like a.
Yes, like a memory stick or something that is relatively cheap and everybody would be able
I think we need to get
one.
it projected and a bit bigger. Otherwise, it's actually rather stressful. This thing, you know. I mean, we all know that in our daily life. It's stressful for all of us. And in fact, you need something that's big and it's not projected. It's projected, not a screen.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting how we've come full circle, really, and we don't really need art at all. We just need windows on the world. And that's the ultimate picture that we can look at. And if only every building could be like Guy's and Thomas's and have wonderful views. Sadly, I think realistically that's not always the case. We are stuck with large buildings like this.
Couldn't agree more. Shall we conclude on that point? Jane is looking anxious to say something.
I just wonder if I could just add one thing in response to your comments about mobile phones, because I very much agree about projecting things bigger, the window and the wall. But I spent some time sitting in GPs' waiting rooms. I wonder if they're slightly different to hospitals, because people didn't look. There was a big painting on the wall, and people tended to have their mobile phones or leaflets and try and kind of enclose themselves. So I wonder if there's maybe a role for that in that. those environments.
I just have to say I vehemently disagree with the idea that nature is the only thing. You know, I think the majority of us are here because we believe in art, and there's a whole, you know, world of nature and, you know, open experiences that I don't disagree are incredible and you know, have a huge value. But you know, art is human expression. It's what we leave behind, and I think that that's why artists bequeath works to art collections. And it's sad that we haven't got onto that today. You know, how has your collection been made? And that's a powerful thing as well. It's the mark that people make and leave behind. So yeah,
of course, I was being slightly flippant in my opinion.
Okay.
I mean, I totally agree with you, and we have numerous reports of patients who ask their relatives to take them or wheel them daily to a painting, and that's given them hope or inspiration. It's the one thing they've remembered. And I agree with you. Sometimes it's the narrative within that image that is what they're looking for, that joy or that hope, and the memory. And so I think art is, and I totally understand the joyful way in which you were explaining it, but it's a very, very valuable part. But going back quickly on the mobile phone, I think we have to remember always, it's a hospital. Many of the patients are sick. They can't use the phone, or they're confused, or they're too ill, or there's an infection risk with the phone. We have to bear in mind, it is a hospital. And I totally agree, in an otherwise clean environment, it would be fine. And if you're not having active treatment, if there's more money in the community, you wouldn't be in the hospital. You shouldn't maybe be in the hospital. So I think that challenge of form and function is the conundrum we have to face.
But worry less about infection risk, doctor.
Well, that's the only doctor in the panel. I'm going to have to defend myself.
I think Joanna's winding up.
No, I was just saying, I agree, the art is just so important, and this is why we collected, and this is why our collection has been going for many years. It actually started at the original hospital in Lanesborough Hotel, which is now the site of the Lanesborough Hotel, back in 1700. So, you know, it has been, I think we do really acknowledge that art in hospitals has been going for many, many years, and will continue to do so as long as people donate and we occasionally purchase art. But on that note, I think I would like to maybe close this discussion, but I would like to thank people. I would like to thank the audience for coming along and joining in, and I hope it's been very enjoyable for you. I'd like to thank our guest speakers, Jayne, Hilary, Anand. I'd like to thank Jill for chairing, and Mike. I'd like to thank the hospital charity, because without the hospital charity this wouldn't be possible. I'd like to thank Open Gallery, Alice and Ellen. Thank you very much for working and putting up with all the little hiccups that we've had along the way. I'd like to thank Creative and Wellbeing UK. I'd like to thank our arts team, and anyone else? I think I've mentioned everyone. Thank you, Paul, as well, for your technical assistance. Wouldn't be able to happen without you. So on that note, please help yourself to any food, and thank you for coming, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and please do sign the book if you want to make any comments, or if you want to leave your email address. We can be in touch for future events and discussions, and thank you for coming.